topic, we've invited and very lucky to have two awesome representatives from Eversource Energy. And if you're not aware, Eversource Energy is our regional utility company. They're already involved in providing clean energy and jobs to our region. You may or may not already know that through a lot of initiatives, current, and there are plans to expand those initiatives as well for the future. We're going to hear about some of those initiatives today. I welcome Ronit Goldstein, Community Relations Manager, and Roger, I hope I say this right, Kranenburg, Vice President of Energy Strategy and Policy. We're going to have just a conversational style meeting today, hear from Ronit and Roger about what some of the initiatives are today and future. This is really conversational style, so if you have a question, please use the chat feature in the Zoom. Bert and I will keep an eye on them. And Ronit and Roger, when we get to like the 5 or 10 minute mark, I'll kind of put my hand up or give this a warning, and that'll be kind of like the last chance for folks to kind of get their questions in and for the day. Any questions we don't get to during this meeting, we can take offline and respond over email afterwards. So with that said, who would like the floor first?
I won't fight you on it, Roger.
I think Ronit, Roger kind of put Ronit kind of put you on the hook today, so
Ronit goes first.
So, I mean, what I would like to say is maybe just a little bit of an introduction, if you don't mind, John, what we do.
Absolutely, please.
We're involved in the region. I'm a little more sort of in the community, as you will, and Roger obviously can talk about the broader reach of the entire company, and then also, we both can speak to what's happening in your backyard, so to speak. But community relations, just by virtue of the word community relations, has a pretty broad reach. I jokingly said to someone the other day, everything but the kitchen sink, but it's really true. Every day is a different day for me, and I'm involved. I cover all of the towns on Cape Cod, as well as the island of Martha's Vineyard that we serve, and I have some gas and electric towns on the South Shore. But really, I feel fortunate to touch a lot of aspects, if not all of the aspects of the business of what we do, and that includes clean energy initiatives. And I communicate with municipalities, with both elected and town staff, keep them apprised really of everything, all things happening at Eversource and within the communities. As far as clean energy, we have, I sort of a top mind is the battery energy storage system, what we refer to as the BESS, but the town of P-Town calls their battery backup. Most people on the street will refer to it as their backup battery. That's a project that we're very excited about at Eversource. It's a first for us. Roger was definitely involved at the forefront of that project team, and we're in the midst of commissioning that system that will essentially, provide a backup source of power for up to 10 hours during a storm. That's sort of the tip of the Cape that, if they lose power to their one line that feeds them, historically they've been in the dark, and they've lived that reality. So we're very excited to see that project fully commissioned by this summer. Some other initiatives, obviously the interconnections of offshore wind that will be, in the Mid-Cape area, both connecting at this time in Barnstable, and obviously projects and developers that will be connecting in the future that you've mentioned. One of them is speaking next week. Other than that, we've got solar, obviously, that we facilitate and have some opportunities through the state and the Climate Act legislation of 2021 to start to build. And we have a project that we're working on with the town of Yarmouth at our area work center for solar canopy. And then last, our EV charging. Well, we don't have energy efficiency on the Cape. That's within Cape Light's jurisdiction. We do have a new EV Make Ready program that's going to be launched. It's before the regulator now. And we feel good about this second big program that's even larger than the last, with a lot of benefits to both municipalities and private organizations to have EV charging stations, where the program essentially is that Eversource covers all of the infrastructure to facilitate the connection, which is the bigger dollar item. And so that's all covered by Eversource and the charging station by the entity itself. So we're very, very excited to roll that out and facilitate more and more opportunities for electric vehicles to gas up, if you will, to get energized. And that's kind of in a nutshell. That's my 2 second. I don't know if Roger, we're kind of winging it today. I don't know if you want to touch base a little bit about some of the policy and work that you do. Yes, I see the question in there. And then one thing I think that's important, maybe Roger can touch base on, is that the company back at the end of 2019 announced, I think we were one of the first companies, if not first utilities, to announce our carbon neutral initiative by 2030. And I know that Roger is well versed about when we talk about decarbonization. I know that the question in the chat is referencing something else, but I'd be remiss if I didn't mention our own, company goals to reduce our carbon footprint. So with that, I'm going to kick it to my partner, Roger, and my partner in crime today, I guess, or in good, we'll say, not in crime. With that, I pass it to Roger.
Thanks, Ronit. And Ronit's become a dear friend of mine over time for a few different projects, etc. So I have the privilege, I consider it a privilege, of looking a little further in the future, where things are going in leading strategy for Eversource, and that's Eversource Wide. So if you look at what's going on in the electric business, the gas business, the water business, but if you look sort of more broadly of what's going on in the energy space, and that's what I'll spend a bit of my time talking about. It's pretty exciting stuff. It's very, very exciting stuff, and that's what attracted me to move to the region and sort of help with this transformation. I love the fact that this region is very progressive, but in a very pragmatic way. It sort of get it done in a good way. So I found that very, very attractive in coming up here. In terms of my background covers very deep technical, a lot more technical than you would expect a strategy guy to have. And then finance, policy, a lot of different aspects of the business, including telecom. I spent some time in telecom, and there's crossover there as well. In terms of what's going on in the big picture, the objective is, how do you get to carbon neutral by 2050? And how do you get that in a pragmatic way is the way I think of it. The huge opportunity near term is moving transportation from fossil to electric. That's a huge opportunity for both the region, the customers, and I'm actually doing some work on it right now and quantifying some of these views, but about a third of our energy is used for transportation. And if you think of it from a very selfish perspective, all that money goes out of the region. There's no oil and gas production in Texas and Saudi Arabia. There's no refining in the region. So all that money that you spend to gas up your car, that's going out of the region. And very selfishly, if we're able to transition that to electric, not only do you reduce your fuel spend over time, but you transfer all that economic value, so to speak, into the region, because electricity is inherently a regional business. And you see this trend going on around the world. Why does China have, I think 50% of bus sales in China are electric? It's because a lot of it's environmental, but a lot of it is their electric system is domestic. And so if they can cut their fossil fuel imports, it works really well. So that's a big near-term one. The other big one that we're involved in is offshore wind, that you're very familiar with. So in transitioning transportation to the electric system, essentially you're relying on the fact that we know how to decarbonize the electric system. We've had a lot of success in decarbonizing the electric system, and offshore wind is a great resource for this region. Every region has its own resource, and this goes back through history, including with fossil. This region has offshore wind. If you're in the desert Southwest, large solar farms are your friend. If you're in Texas, onshore wind is your friend, because there's a lot of wind in West Texas, or if you're in the Midwest, for example. So you've seen that throughout the history of the electric business. And in other parts, you know, Ronit knows this, I'm a huge fan of the P-Town battery. And I've tested this premise, you know, in COVID, you had the privilege of getting these international conferences, et cetera. And I've tested this premise. It is globally unique. There's not another facility I've found anywhere in the world of its size and functionality. The functionality I'm referring to is islanding. And I refer to it, you know, it's a little bit like your laptop, you know, you're working, power goes out, battery in your laptop is still there to power you. Technically, it's, you know, it's a really fascinating project, and I'm very happy that we're doing it, and we're in commissioning right now. Haven't found another one like it anywhere in the world. The closest I found was a project that got canceled in Palau, which is in sort of Asia. So that's a very exciting project. In terms of other areas of the business, I spent a lot of my time thinking through how do you get to carbon neutral by 2050 in a cold region with cold snaps like New England. It's a very, very different discussion than if you're in California or in Texas. It's an entirely different discussion. The closest I've found is the discussions going on in Northern Europe. So I direct policymakers to sort of look to Northern Europe and what they're doing. And if you play out this whole picture, and the other sort of exciting area that Ronit mentioned is solar and the climate bill, and I had a thing or two to do with that. And we got permission to build solar, but permission to build solar in a way only a utility brings value, which is engaging with the community, seeing what the values and needs are of that community, and fulfilling those. It's not easy, I'll be honest with you, because you're trying to combine a lot of different things. But the general concept is, you know, our business is very much tied to the community and the needs of the community, as opposed to, you know, other businesses that may have different needs. So it behooves us to engage with the community, figure out what's important, what's needed, and then, you know, make the investments and more importantly, maintain those investments. And a big part of our pitch, which resonated, is when there's a problem, we have depth like no one else does. You know, we have our crews, multi-state, but then when things get really bad, we can call in crews throughout North America. Very few entities have that ability. So in building out that program, you know, we can bring a lot of resiliency to communities and other benefits that, you know, communities value, and we have to demonstrate that in our filings, et cetera. I've had the pleasure, I don't just sit in the office and think up this stuff. I've had the pleasure of spending time in the Yarmouth EOC, learned a lot in sitting there and sort of understanding what happens in a storm, you know, what are the things that come up and why. And that actually played into the way we're looking at and executing the solar program, because I got a very strong sensitivity. And I always text and call Ronit whenever I run into stuff that I'm not that familiar with. But sensitivity around, you know, certain facilities being out. I remember I was in Yarmouth and sitting across from the fire department, and they were like, hey, that retirement community has been out for a while. We're starting to get worried. We really need you to move that up the priority list. And that gave you a very deep appreciation for, you know, their world, you know, what's going on. And that plays into, in my opinion, into, you know, how our role in the future, our need to, you know, build in resiliency, you know, leverage a lot of information that, you know, Ronit and her colleagues garnered from the community in making our decisions and planning. And then if you look at this future that I've painted with all these different things, a big part of our role is running the network, you know, the grid, you know, be it transmission to bring in more offshore wind, be it distribution to connect EVs, connect solar, connect batteries. And our role is to run that both technically, but also from a customer service and a community service perspective. You know, we're the trusted entity and we're heavily regulated. So that's part of the trust. And you can think of the analogy like stock trading. You want the stock exchange and the clearinghouse that everyone's relying on and leveraging to be heavily regulated for the benefit of everyone. And that's kind of our business model. So those are some of the things I wanted to share and touch on, and happy to sort of take it from there. No questions, the wrong question. I'm happy to address any question that I'm able to. Oh, and I should have mentioned one of the biggest resources of this region is energy efficiency. So if you look at the region from the perspective of its energy short, both in terms of supply and transport region, energy efficiency is one of your biggest friends. And the leaders in the world on that I know of is Japan. Why? Because they don't have any resources. So they leverage energy efficiency as strongly as they can. So anyway, those are some thoughts and comments to kick off the conversation.
Great, thank you. We do have a couple questions here. I have a couple of my own, but I'll hold them till later. We have a question here. You kind of spoke to this already. I'm not sure if it was addressed specifically, so I think it's worth mentioning. Will Ronit and Roger speak on decarbonization of residential homes, both existing and new construction? This is a multi-part question. And possibly mention the new all-electric homes program sponsored by MassSave, and I think CCL is Cape Light. I don't know what CCL is. I don't know if that's supposed to be Cape Light Compact. And possibly add comments why the gas side of Eversource is okay with the electric movements across the state to meet the 2030, 2050 reductions. Do you want me to repeat that?
Take that one, you want to? I'll take it.
Yeah, you're gonna get. I have a feeling you're gonna get some interesting questions today.
No, those are all.
It's a couple of questions, I think, too. That's why I made the face.
No, they're all very fair questions. So in terms of homes, new versus existing, I mean, the reality of New England is a lot of the housing stock is existing and will probably exist for a long time, and that poses a challenge. Folks have told me, and again, I'm not from this region, but some of the houses that were built in the turn of the century, the old Victorians, which people love, they're not well insulated, and they're really hard to insulate. Is what I learned from our energy efficiency group. When I moved to the region, I loved the Bauhaus style houses, and I quickly found that they weren't insulated. The roofs weren't insulated, etc. So the reality is you have to deal with the existing building stock. And interestingly enough, I was talking to folks in the Netherlands, and they had the same challenge. And I wouldn't have expected it because I always thought European houses were perfectly insulated. And they said, no, we had cheap gas, so we didn't really insulate our houses that well. So you've got to deal with that. That's a tough one. Some of our energy efficiency group does a lot of targeted marketing to find the homes that ultimately will get insulated. So I thought the problem was identifying the homes that need insulation. They're like, no, we know which ones need insulation. We're focused on the ones that will get to put in the insulation. And it turns out they're, one of the sweet spots was homes that were built in the 80s. So you'll see pockets of those homes. If you're building new homes, it's kind of a clean slate. You've got a lot of opportunity with modern technology to do a lot of great stuff. You have very tight building envelopes. You can do a lot with new homes. The other resource that we're piloting in Framingham is, and I think of it in terms of, it's a great fit for homes that you may not be able to get to the level of insulation that you want to, existing homes. That's geothermal. In essence, you're transferring the efficiency from the building envelope, and you still want to do as much as you can at the building envelope, but you're transferring that efficiency to the heat pump. So a ground source heat pump doesn't suffer degradation in cold snaps because you're relying on the ground temperature, and they run at efficiencies of 400% or 500%, which initially engineers say you can't do that. You can't get above 100% efficiency, but it's how you measure it. It's moving heat, it's not creating heat. So those are some of the things that I think of when we think of new versus existing homes. I think I answered the question.
You did. So I guess but there's a part of the question, and maybe I'll ask the question a little differently. You deliver natural gas and electricity. How does the company feel about, we're talking about pushing natural gas away and going electric, but you're also selling it at the same time. Like, what's the company like sentiment about that? Is it just like a, hey, we know this is happening, we're going for it? Or like, I think that's kind of like I think that's from what I'm understanding, that's the question.
Yeah, and that's real. And much of what's our views and opinions and the work that we've done on that is in the DPU 2080 docket. In a much more accessible version of that is thefutureofgas.com. I would encourage you, if you're interested in that topic, to look at that. We've been very open and very transparent. There's a lot of work and analysis behind it. And in essence, we think to get to this decarbonized future, one of the most plausible ways to get there is a hybrid system, a combination of offsetting as much gas consumption or fossil consumption as you can with air source heat pumps, but not giving up on the backup sort of value that gas brings, for example. But think of it more sort of broadly, the backup value that energy molecules bring. So if you look at our energy system today, it's got a lot of diversity value. And I'm a big fan of diversity in any system, be it technical systems or human systems. It's your best mitigant of uncertainty. And we live with uncertainty. You can't remove all the uncertainty in a cost-effective way. So diversity, both in supply as well as transport to the point of use, is your friend in any system. And here we're talking about the energy system. So throwing away molecules completely, I'm not a big fan of, because it removes a lot of that diversity. So even though we see a lot of the value shifting into the electric business, we feel, and this is in the DPU docket, et cetera, you need to maintain that diversity. That brings up a lot of policy questions, because now you're sort of changing the way you're using those systems, but throwing away the pipes underground that we've invested and built, and you're essentially owned by all of us. Doesn't seem like a very good choice, in my opinion. And analogies I think of that is, in telecom, we didn't get to broadband by putting fiber to every single house. We got to broadband by using the old twisted pair that we put in for phone service and figured out how to use it differently. The other one I think of is, look at societal regret about ripping up urban rail. You don't throw away last mile transportation systems. You repurpose them over time. So, and that's how to sort of the balance, and we have a level of credibility because we have large electric business, and that's the bulk of our business, and that's where we see high growth. But we have a gas business, and we have the water business. So and then looking at from the lens of the region's needs, the region, heat is not a luxury item in New England. Texas is a very different dynamic, but it's not a luxury item in New England. Everyone, and I remind folks, when we bought the Columbia gas system, that there's an S in ESG, your responsibility to society, and everyone should be afforded a certain level of comfort and health, etc. And staying warm is a very key part of something that we should offer everyone. So anyway, those are my thoughts.
Great. Continuing, there's some other questions, but since we're kind of on the geothermal, you mentioned geothermal, and there's a question, and I had a question about it too. The pilot, you have this pilot going in Framingham. I read about it on the website. Dr. Jane Ward, one of our members here, has a question. Do you have any tips for installers? She mentions that she had a terrific system in Texas, kind of like what I'm gathering here, and she's asked this question, I think, in the last meeting. Seems like there's less knowledge and interest in our area for geothermal. any tips on consulting or installation in our region that you might have?
The main tip I would offer, and Ronit probably knows a lot more about this, is leverage our energy efficiency group where we're franchised to operate. They have a lot of that knowledge and give you a lot of sort of information. One of the things I learned and over time is much of the geothermal equipment that's out there was predominantly targeted at the air conditioning market, and we're looking to develop the heating market. So a big part of the Framingham pilot is sort of figuring this out together, and then it could be a very good solution for this region because again, it's not subject to some of the limitations that doing the heat exchange with air suffers from. So I'm pretty excited, and I think Framingham will teach us a lot. And again, we're one of the leaders, at least in the country. I think there's a bit going on in Europe in this realm, but I look around the country, and I think we're definitely leading on the geothermal side for heat, not for heat generation. Generation is more a California.
Understood. So I think just want to be really bluntly clear about this. This is a service you're currently offering. So Jane could actually contact Eversource right now and get some kind of consultation, or is this something we're going to see in the future?
I mean, I don't know if we formally do this, but our energy efficiency group's really good and really knowledgeable. And I would just view them as kind of a resource for customers. Ronit, keep me honest on this one.
Yeah, so I mean, I would definitely put a pitch in for Cape, like contact who is can actually execute and has the programs. But there's nothing precluding Cape residents from consulting and looking up and researching through Eversource's energy efficiency, any different than any other energy efficiency across the nation, and just getting research. As far as the programs and referrals and execution, I think that would be through Cape Light Compact, but we work collaboratively with the Cape Light Compact, and we're in regular contact with them. So I think that again, as folks that are spearheading and involved in all of these new technologies, we're both available for for answering questions and for research. I know that the Framingham program and my counterpart that works covering the city of Framingham, it's an exciting pilot program. They're really trying to, as Roger, just echo what Roger said, they're figuring it out, but figuring it out for the purpose of developing it and growing it in the future. They see it as as a real opportunity.
Understood.
So,
thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, and Ronit, thanks for keeping me honest. That's why I always refer to Ronit.
I'm helpful. I'm useful.
So this is a heavy question. I'm gonna try and break this down. It starts very simply. Do you see new home builder incentive to install PV on new homes? Continuing, the state and federal credits, SRECs or Schedule D benefits are not enough to get new home builders to install. A flat dollar amount incentive would move that along dramatically. I don't fully understand that question. Do you?
Yeah, I understand it in general. I'll be honest. I'm probably not geared to sort of answer it specifically. I mean, some of the generality, there's a lot of incentives, both at the federal level, the tax credit, as well as the state level. There's a lot of incentives for solar. And we see a lot of it sort of going as existing homes that put solar on. I think what this person's getting to is how do you incentivize builders of new homes to integrate it into that construction. New home construction is, they'll look at squeezing every margin that they can out of it. So it's something that would have to be targeted for those builders and work for those builders. And much beyond that, I couldn't say. A big part is also customer demand. If customers are demanding solar in the new homes, they'll put them on and build them. But short of that, they're not going to do it unless there's either demand or policy that makes it worth their while.
Understood. I know some of these questions are on the periphery of, your strategic plan and your opinion, so I appreciate you entertaining them. Let's move on here. Next question. I'm afraid to read some of these, but there might be. Can you address any future plans to expand the Outer Cape energy storage model to other locations on Cape? Do you have any criteria for success in Provincetown that would lead to an expansion? I'm assuming if the power goes out and they get power for 10 hours, that's a success. But her question is, how will you determine that giant battery out in P-Town? What would deem that a success, and would you roll that model out? I'm guessing, working mainland.
Yeah, I mean, the answer is absolutely. And the way we think of it is battery is a new tool in the toolbox to provide what we provide. And what do we provide in sort of the network or grid side? Reliable, resilient service. In P-Town, we're struggling in how to get sort of the level that we needed, or sort of we think that everyone should be afforded of reliability and resiliency because of the geography of P-Town. Batteries came along, they evolved. If we try to do it, 10 years ago, it would have been crazy expensive to even do what we're doing now. But batteries evolved, the technology evolved to the point where we're like, okay, this makes sense for P-Town. And we'll look at situation by situation, location by location, and make those decisions. I mean, I'll be honest with you. If you're looking, because this is a low population growth area, it's not desert Southwest. If you're looking at a low population growth area, the changes that you're going to be looking at to what we've already built is you've got lab space going in the Boston area. You've got EVs coming on the system. You've got solar coming on the system. So you'll have to look at those changes and not population trend changes. That kind of is the classic. And when you look at those, you'll see isolated areas of need, and it will look at how best to fulfill that need. Is it upgrading a substation? Is it replacing an existing line, reconductoring, or is it batteries? Again, it's just another tool in making those evaluations and choices. And there's a couple of locations in Mass. I don't know how public it is, but there's a couple of locations in Mass that sort of passes that filter and arrives as batteries is a viable solution. So we're very agnostic of what the solution is, and batteries is one of the many tools in the tool chest from our perspective. Energy efficiency is another tool in the tool chest. Customer-sided batteries is another tool in the tool chest, and our role there is coordinating and organizing everything connected to the grid, be it solar or be it a customer-side battery, and leveraging those in aggregate. So yeah, we see, and as technology improves, you'll see that as you're weighing these options, if this one improves faster than this one, then sort of the scale tips towards that option. But we look at it very much on a location by location basis.
My kids might be disappointed to hear this. They always get a little excited when the power goes out for a little while, at least.
But not for a long time.
Until the Wi-Fi's out and then they can't use their devices, right?
Well, I'll tell you what, if I'm a restaurant and I've got
a very different day.
if I'm a restaurant, I've got a cooler full of food. I love this idea that you're doing.
I can't just to echo what Roger said. I cannot think, when you talk about location, I cannot think of a better place to stage a battery than P-Town. I mean, it's an alternative to poles and wires, which we wouldn't be doing because of the National Seashore. It wasn't going to happen. They need another option, another solution, another source. And so I think it was a smart siting decision. Originally it was actually going to be in Wellfleet. I don't know if folks know that. And then just looking at different sites, and it made more and more sense. Our engineering department said, why wouldn't we put it in P-Town? We can energize the whole tip of the Outer Cape. Why wouldn't we build this to do that? And so that's how it came to be where it is today.
Yeah, the classic solution, as Ronit's pointing out, is diversity of supply. And engineers are like, well, if you want diversity of supply, you don't put it where your supply is coming from. You put it from the other direction.
Right. That's exactly right. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Next question from Jane. I wasn't aware of this either. She said, I'm not aware of you made mention of an Eversource Water sector of the business. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so the company we acquired some time back, I don't know when it was, Ronit.
2018. I used to work for the water company.
Oh, okay.
So I used to work for Aquarian. So it was at the end of 2017, Mass DPU approved the acquisition. It was actually across all 3 states, Connecticut, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts. Eversource acquired as a wholly owned subsidiary Aquarian Water. And so it's a public water supplier, just like a water department, but it's a private entity that owns and operates all of the assets. And so there's some systems in Massachusetts, some in New Hampshire, and then the bulk are in Connecticut. But Eversource, I think, was a pioneer in being both an electric, gas, and water supplier. And so that's what Roger is referencing. And there were synergies in the sense, or parallel. There's a lot of what we do, all the water is an ingestible product, so it's very different. There's a lot of parallel to gas, if you will, and in some ways to electric. Though I was connected to the gas side of the business initially when I started working at Eversource, just because of pressure and underground facilities. But it made sense. So I don't know if I took your thunder away, Roger.
No, thank you.
But I worked for them for 10 years, so it was. I'm rounding all the different utilities now.
I mean, from a corporate strategy. From a corporate strategy perspective, there's a lot of great synergies that Ronit's talking about.
Okay, great, thank you. Next question. The town of Falmouth and Eversource are partnering to provide additional power to Martha's Vineyard as a local project. Is that something that you could discuss?
I can take this one, Roger. I'm very heavily, it's all things Falmouth. In fact, I have a meeting with DPW on Monday. So the Martha's Vineyard Reliability Project and the 91 cable replacement project are we view it as 2 projects, but it's essentially a reliability project that consists of 2 new circuits to the island of Martha's Vineyard. And what currently it's served by 4 cables. We're going to add a 5th cable, and we're going to replace one of the existing cables that's reached its useful life and actually faulted over the summer. And we're excited about this for another reason, because we're going to be able, when we talk about clean energy, we're going to be able to decommission the 5 diesel generators that the company uses. While Eversource doesn't own them, we have the ability to utilize them for peak shaving over the summer months. And we're going to be able to decommission those 5 antiquated diesel generators by the spring of 2025. And so that's part of the reasoning for the reliability project and the 5th cable. But it's also, it's a good story to be able to reduce our carbon footprint on the island, and also meet, in conversations with the Martha's Vineyard Commission, meet they're looking ahead to energization and meet their future needs. That cable, both the new cables will help facilitate the growth and the electrification plans for the island. So it's a great partnership. And for the Falmouth side, the good part is that there will be some widening of the bike path that we're going through, as well as creating a duct bank and conduit system that we're going to be able to utilize in the future. There'll be room in that system. Aside from the cables to the island, there'll be room to facilitate reliability projects that serve the town of Falmouth itself and those residents. So it's a great project, a great initiative, and another interesting one for me to be part of. The installation of submarine cables, which I've never done that before. So
I'll jump in with sort of an addition to my favorite part of it is, I see a future where all the cars and buses on Martha's Vineyard are electric, and even a possible future where the ferry becomes electric, which sounds crazy, but there's one running right now in Scandinavia.
It's happening, Roger. The Steamship Authority already talked to us about electrification of the potential. So we're doing some upgrades to Woods Hole. in discussions with the Steamship Authority to get more charging stations down at the ferry station there in Woods Hole, as well as just making, incorporating into our plans the possibility of an electric ferry that would need to charge on the Falmouth side. So what needs to happen? Again, that's when these conversations are so important. We need to know what people are planning. They need to know, what we're, the dialogue needs to happen so that we can make these things happen. So it is, those discussions are already happening, Roger. I was pretty, that's recent.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
Roger,
Hopefully I answered that question.
yeah, that was great. Thank you. I was just going to add, Roger, since you love Cape Cod so much, you might have to come down during the summer and just keep an eye on the project to make sure, things are going the way you kind of strategize, right?
Yep, I do that. Actually, I was in Chatham. One of our dear family friends lives there, and my wife twisted my arm to go to Chatham for the day, which is a long day.
I love hearing this because I'll say, hey guys, you want to go to Chatham today? And they're like, oh, we went there last week, They want to go to Boston. So folks, we've got about just under 10 minutes left. If you want to, last chance to put in a few questions here. I had a question. You made mention in part of your plan of the electric car charging stations. Is that something that Eversource might get into as a service, or are you supporting private enterprise with electric car stations? I'm just curious if you could elaborate, elaborate on that a little bit more.
Yeah. So we're supporting private enterprise to put in the actual chargers, and this is all sort of detailed in our the programs that we filed and got approval for in Massachusetts and a new filing. So our role is to build the infrastructure up to the charger, essentially. And I won't get into all the intricacies of what we own and what we rebate, but in essence, our role is to make sure the infrastructure is built so that a private enterprise can put in the charger. We facilitate a lot of that. We work with the site, what we call the site host. So you can think of the person that owns the piece of land that charger will go into. And we pre-approve various vendors that they can look to actually put in the charger, manage a charger, a variety of options. But our role is very much the infrastructure. It matches our business well and matches our community role. And private enterprise will sort of take it from there. In cases where private enterprise doesn't take it, and we've gotten permission to put more incentives in to ensure that those facilities get built in EJC communities, for example, because we want to see those chargers. We want to see everyone benefit from this transition and transformation. So we've gotten permission to give a little bit more incentives where things. And you can think of it like rural electrification. We made a decision 100 years back that everyone should be afforded electricity. And we just sort of got it done. So that's a big part of our role, is executing and implementing on public policy choices.
Okay, great. When you say you're supporting, does that mean you're going to replace some parts of the grid are really old and outdated? Like on Cape Cod, we've got popsicle sticks sometimes, carrying wires across it. Is that the kind of infrastructure support that you're talking about, or actually making sure there's enough juice there that people can take advantage?
Yeah, a big part of what I've been spending my time on is we want to make sure we're not the obstacle of something that's going to happen. So if you look at I'm absolutely convinced that around 2025 the EV adoption takes off like a rocket because you get to the point where consumers are like, oh, this is such a better way of doing it. It's a better vehicle, the cost, and then the projections I'm looking at, you start getting the cost of the car becomes comparable. And we saw this and I was just looking at this data, when you were looking at kind of the Tesla S as kind of the predominant vehicle that was out there, you sort of saw adoption go like this. When the 3 came on the market, things took off. So consumers, it'll take a while, but I think, similar to the iPod, when consumers get their hands on this, they're like, oh, this is such a much better way of doing it. And I saw this in industrial electrification. initially a lot of the focus was on energy efficiency. And when the plant managers got their hands on an electric drive as opposed to a mechanical drive, they're like, oh, this works so much better. So a big part of what we're focused on is to make sure we're ready and getting ahead of these trends that are going to happen. So to your point, making sure that the power needs are there at a very localized level, make sure the infrastructure is there. But the trick is we can't get too ahead of ourselves because people are like, why did you do that? So the trick is it's that balance of being ready, responding quickly, but not getting too far ahead of the trends.
That's a good point. Next question here. Thank you. Next question here. Has there been any discussion of using hydrogen for energy storage and or transportation? There's been some rumblings, says Bert Jackson.
Yeah, so the key effort that seems to be the leading effort, so I spent part of my time looking at infrastructure bill money. And the pitch I made was there's a lot of money there that can do, lines up with a lot of stuff that we want to do anyway. So there's about $9.5 billion that the federal government is available for hydrogen. The leading effort, and this is all public, the 4 states of New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, Connecticut, at the governor level have agreed to work together towards a Northeast hydrogen hub. Some of the sort of potential uses of hydrogen, as Bert pointed out, is heavy long distance transport. I personally don't see a long distance, folks that are building these would probably take me to task, but I personally don't see a long haul 18-wheeler that's battery. I see that as that could go hydrogen or it could just stay diesel because of the characteristics of those. The other is energy storage. As we bring more and more renewables onto the system, we'll have more and more need to sort of store those renewables and dispatch them at different times of the day at a minimum. Some of the new energy loads coming on, again, one of the beauties of hydrogen is it's a molecule. It gives you that diversity. It's a low carbon molecule. It's got some challenges. Don't get me wrong. This is not an easy sort of transition. And that's why the federal government's putting so much money into it. The Europeans are doing a lot of really great work on it as well. The Germans, the Dutch, the UK. So it gives you that diversity of an energy molecule in addition to an electron. And we'll figure out as we go through this journey, how to sort of leverage that best.
Great. I'm a programmer and a marketing guy. I'm still getting my head around electric vehicles. So I can say personally, I really appreciate that people like you are thinking about all these things for us.
Go drive one. They're great. I'm a car guy. And go drive one. They're an amazing drive.
There's a lot of people talk about they're going to miss the sound of the car. And now I'm hearing that they're even talking about having speakers in the car so that when you hit the gas pedal, you can make the car sound the way you want. Have you heard this?
Yeah, I mean, that's real. So I took my son's 12. I took him to, he took me, it's probably a better description, to a go-kart, indoor go-kart place. And they were all electric go-karts, but they added the sound of go-karts. So they're a lot of fun.
That's amazing. All right, last question here, folks. We got a couple minutes left. Last question from Eldon. Eldon appreciates the 10 hours battery life extension to Provincetown. I'm going to rephrase this a kind of bit. Do you think how was 10 hours picked? Was it picked because you felt that's what the capacity was, or do you think could that exceed someday? A lot of times saying they may be out for much longer than 10 hours. How was that time kind of picked, and do you think that might be extended someday if the obviously given the first experiment is successful?
So Roger, I want to correct something. It's 10 hours during the winter. It's a different story during the summer. It's about 1 to 3 hours. So it all depends on demand. Okay. And it was really, and Roger, forgive me if I'm saying the wrong thing, but I think I'm the one that gets the first call every time they're out. So from their police chief or their town manager, any time of day, any time of night. it's really to buy us some time to make the repair was really the idea, is to create a system. And 24.9 megawatts, that's a pretty good sized system, isn't it, Roger? I mean,
Yeah, the biggest that I know of.
and it's a pretty big, I mean, it's right in the town transfer station. It's in an area of the transfer station that wasn't otherwise utilized. You know, so it's a real community partnership, but it's a pretty big, I don't know whether there's ability to extend that. I think that's the question on that. Maybe I'll kick it to you, Roger, but I just wanted to clarify that the 10 hours was like in this past winter storm in January, when they were out because of a fault in Truro along that line, that one line, you know, that sole circuit that goes out there. And unfortunately it was in Truro, the fault, not even in P-Town. Had the battery been up, the whole town would have been energized while we make the repair in Truro. So that's really what it's, the purpose of that, or the driver. So it's as much a reliability project as it is a clean energy project, sort of equally, but the reliability was the driver. And we were able to use renewable energy to solve that reliability issue. So I don't know, Roger, if you want to talk about extending it,
Yeah,
I couldn't speak to that.
no, I mean, it's a trade-off, right? You know, at a certain point, it becomes cost prohibitive to cover every contingency. So, you know, we sort of made a call based on historical outages, our ability to get crews from Yarmouth to where, you know, a possible break would occur. Turns out historically, most of the challenges we've had is in the low consumption months. So that gave us, you know, that gives us more time to get out there. You know, hour and a half is pretty tight in the summer, as I've learned, to sort of get from Yarmouth to there. But I was joking with our operations, they're like, can't you get a police escort or something? But that's a trade-off you're making. And you know, if it takes a little bit longer than an hour and a half, you know, you folks are out for less time, which I think will make them happy. But you can certainly put in a bigger and bigger battery, but you know, what's the optimal point? In terms of putting in a bigger battery, yeah, I doubt that we would do that, but you know, as technology evolves, you can certainly envision in the future, if there is a need for more capacity, my guess is you're going to get more and more battery in a smaller and smaller space. So the space is finite now, but if there's a need in the future, you can probably put more capacity in that as the technology evolves.
Great. I think that paints a pretty clear picture of what you're trying to do. On that note, we're a minute past here. We're going to wrap this up. Really appreciate. I don't envy your position. You're working with politics. You're making everyone happy. You're working with things that don't exist yet. You're trying to predict the future. Really appreciate what you're doing and appreciate you taking the time to come and speak to us today.